Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that human civilization almost ended 40 years ago, and nobody told you about it. Not because of an asteroid, not because of a terrorist attack, not because of a world war, but because a computer made a mistake. A mistake so terrifying that it nearly triggered a nuclear apocalypse. For a few minutes, the Soviet Union believed that the United States had launched nuclear missiles toward its territory. Military alarms were screaming, computer systems were flashing warnings. The world's two most powerful nuclear nations stood on the edge of destruction. And the most unbelievable part of this story is that the fate of billions of people depended on the decision of a single man sitting in a secret military bunker. A man who wasn't a president, a man who wasn't a general, a man whose name most people have never heard. His name was Stanislav Petrov. And many historians believe that on one night in 1983, he may have saved the world. But before we understand what happened that night, we need to understand just how dangerous the world had become. The year was 1983. The Cold War was at one of its most terrifying points. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global struggle for power. Both countries possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. Neither side trusted the other. Every military exercise looked like a possible attack. Every political speech sounded like a threat. Just a few weeks earlier, Soviet fighter jets had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it accidentally entered Soviet airspace. All 269 people on board were killed. The incident shocked the world and dramatically increased tensions between East and West. At the same time, Soviet intelligence agencies were running a secret operation known as Operation Ryan. Their mission was simple but terrifying: search for any sign that America might be preparing a surprise nuclear attack. Think about that for a moment. The Soviet government was already expecting war. They were already looking for evidence that an attack was coming. They were already nervous, suspicious, and afraid. Then came the night of September 26, 1983. Shortly after midnight, deep inside a secret Soviet early warning facility near Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov began what seemed like a routine shift. His job was one of the most important on Earth. Petrov was responsible for monitoring a new satellite system called OCO. This advanced network of satellites was designed to detect American missile launches. If the United States ever launched nuclear weapons, the system would provide the Soviet Union with precious minutes of warning. Everything seemed normal. Then suddenly, without warning, an alarm exploded through the control room. The computer screen turned red. A message appeared. Missile launch detected. According to the system, the United States had fired a nuclear missile at the Soviet Union. The room froze. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a simulation. The computer was reporting a real attack. Then something even worse happened. A second missile appeared, then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth. The computer now claimed that 5 American nuclear missiles were heading towards Soviet territory. At that moment, Petrov faced a decision that no human being should ever have to make. According to military protocol, he was supposed to report the attack immediately to his superiors. From there, Soviet leaders would decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike against the United States. And that's where things become truly frightening. You see, during the Cold War, both superpowers feared something called a first strike. The idea was simple. If one country launched enough nuclear weapons, it might destroy the other country's missiles before they could be fired. Because of this fear, leaders often had only minutes to decide whether to retaliate. Not hours, not days, minutes. If Petrov reported the attack as genuine, events could begin moving toward a full-scale nuclear war. A war that could kill hundreds of millions of people. A war that could poison the atmosphere, collapse governments, and possibly end modern civilization. Everything depended on whether the warning was real, and the computer seemed completely confident. But Petrov noticed something strange, something that didn't make sense. If the United States truly wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, why would it launch only 5 missiles? Think about it. A real first strike would likely involve hundreds of missiles, maybe even thousands. Launching only 5 made no strategic sense. The more Petrov thought about it, the more suspicious he became. Then he remembered something else. The OCO satellite system was relatively new. It had never been tested under real-world conditions. What if the system was wrong? What if the computers were making a mistake? At that moment, Petrov found himself trapped between two terrifying possibilities. If he ignored the warning and the attack was real, the Soviet Union could be destroyed. But if he reported the warning and the attack was false, the Soviet Union might launch a nuclear war by mistake. One decision, two possible disasters, and only minutes to choose. Meanwhile, another problem made the situation even more confusing. Ground-based radar systems could not confirm the attack. But that didn't necessarily mean the missiles weren't real. The radar systems could only detect missiles after they had traveled a certain distance. There was a gap of time between what the satellites saw and what the radars could verify. During that gap, nobody knew the truth. The satellites said nuclear war had begun. The radar said nothing. Petrov had to decide which system to trust. The pressure was unimaginable. Every second felt heavier than the last. Every person in the control room was waiting. The clock was ticking. If American missiles were truly in the air, they would arrive soon. And if Petrov made the wrong choice, history could end before sunrise. So what did he do? Against military protocol, against the computer, against everything he had been trained to trust, Stanislav Petrov made a decision that stunned everyone around him. He reported the alert as a false alarm. But was he right? Or had he just gambled the future of humanity on a guess? For the next several minutes, the entire world unknowingly held its breath. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Inside the Soviet command center, the tension became unbearable. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every person in that room understood what was at stake. If the warning was real, American nuclear missiles would soon begin striking Soviet territory. Entire cities could disappear in seconds. Millions of people could die before they even knew what was happening. And if the Soviet Union retaliated, the United States would answer back. Within hours, the world could be consumed by nuclear fire. Petrov sat silently, waiting and waiting and waiting. Then something incredible happened. Nothing. No missiles appeared. No explosions were reported. No nuclear attack occurred. The warning had been false. The computer system that was supposed to protect the Soviet Union had made a catastrophic mistake. But this raises an even bigger question. How could one of the most advanced military warning systems in the world falsely detect a nuclear attack? The answer sounds almost unbelievable. It wasn't enemy action. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a secret weapon. It was sunlight. Investigators later discovered that a rare combination of sunlight, high-altitude clouds, and satellite positioning had tricked the OCO warning system. As the sun's rays reflected off clouds at a specific angle, the satellites misinterpreted the reflections as the bright exhaust plumes of American missile launches. Think about that for a second. One of the most dangerous moments in human history wasn't caused by a hostile nation. It wasn't caused by a military invasion. It was caused by sunlight hitting clouds in exactly the wrong way. A natural phenomenon nearly convinced a nuclear superpower that World War III had begun. But surprisingly, Stanislav Petrov did not return home as a hero. In fact, the aftermath of the incident was almost as strange as the incident itself. The Soviet military quietly investigated what happened. Officials realized that publicizing the event would expose weaknesses in their highly secret warning system. Admitting that their technology had nearly triggered a false nuclear response would be embarrassing and potentially dangerous. As a result, the incident was largely buried. Petrov was not celebrated. He was not awarded a medal. He was not treated like the man who may have saved millions of lives. Instead, he reportedly faced criticism over procedural issues and paperwork errors. For years, the event remained hidden from the public. Imagine that. You make a decision that may prevent the largest disaster in human history, and almost nobody knows about it. For more than a decade, the world remained unaware of how close it may have come to catastrophe. Then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, details of the incident slowly began emerging. People around the world were shocked. Many historians, journalists, and military experts began asking the same question. Did Stanislav Petrov save the world? At first, the answer seems obvious. After all, if he had reported the attack as real, events could have escalated toward nuclear war. But the truth is more complicated. Some experts argue that additional layers of verification existed within the Soviet command structure. They believe political leaders would have checked multiple sources before ordering a retaliatory strike. According to this view, Petrov was important, but he wasn't the only safeguard. Others disagree. They point out that the political climate in 1983 was extremely tense. Soviet leaders were already worried about a surprise American attack. Fear, uncertainty, and limited information can cause people to make dangerous decisions. In situations like that, small mistakes can rapidly grow into global disasters. And history contains several examples that prove just how fragile nuclear stability can be. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, another Soviet officer named Vasily Arkhipov helped prevent a possible nuclear confrontation when he refused to approve the launch of a nuclear torpedo. In 1979, a computer error in the United States falsely suggested that hundreds of Soviet missiles were heading toward America. And in 1995, Russia briefly mistook a scientific research rocket launched from Norway for a possible nuclear threat. Again and again, history shows a disturbing pattern. Technology makes mistakes, systems fail, computers generate false alarms, and in some cases, human judgment becomes the final barrier between civilization and catastrophe. That's what makes the Petrov incident so powerful. It isn't just a Cold War story, it's a story about trust. How much should we trust machines? How much should we trust automated systems? And what happens when technology appears completely certain, but reality says otherwise? These questions are more important today than ever before. Modern military systems are far more advanced than those of 1983. Artificial intelligence can process information faster than any human. Surveillance networks cover enormous portions of the planet. Automated systems assist with decisions that once required large teams of experts. But despite all that progress, one uncomfortable truth remains. Technology is not perfect. It can still misinterpret information. It can still produce false conclusions. And sometimes the consequences of those mistakes can be enormous. That is why the story of Stanislav Petrov continues to matter. Because on one September night in 1983, a computer was convinced that nuclear war had begun. The alarms were certain, the system was certain, the data was certain. But one man wasn't, and because he was willing to question what everyone else accepted, humanity was given another day. Today, billions of people go about their lives without ever hearing his name. They work, they travel, they raise families, they make plans for the future. Completely unaware that decades ago, all of that may have depended on a single decision made inside a silent military bunker. A decision made in just a few minutes. A decision made by one man. And perhaps the most important decision in human history. Because sometimes the difference between peace and disaster isn't a powerful weapon. Sometimes it's simply a person brave enough to say, "What if the computer is wrong?"